Night settled heavily over the long stretch of highway, and the steady drum of rain on the cab roof matched the restless thoughts spinning in Daniel's mind as he drove his 18-wheeler through upstate New York. His headlights cut through the darkness, casting fleeting shapes along the empty road, while the windshield wipers thudded back and forth in a slow, calming rhythm. Daniel had spent years on these roads, moving cargo from Buffalo to Albany and every small city in between, and each trip seemed to blend into the last until it all felt like one endless drive through the shadows. Most nights, it was just him, the hum of the engine, the rain, and the scent of old coffee in his thermos. He had gotten used to the pattern. Drive for hours, make a stop at one of those gas stations with burnt coffee and packaged sandwiches, sometimes chat a bit with other drivers if the mood struck. Then it was back behind the wheel, eyes fixed, on the ribbon of road, mind drifting between memories of home and the knowledge that morning would look just like this, all over again. Yet, that night, Daniel couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. Sure, he was tired. He'd been pushing since early afternoon, fueling himself on caffeine and promises that the next rest stop would be the one where he finally took a break. The cold made his shoulders hurt, and the gloom outside added to the heaviness in his chest. But something else tugged at him, like a subtle warning or a sign. He tried blaming the feeling on the rain and the haze that made the road seem longer and lonelier than usual, but it was more than that. Maybe it was the way the traffic seemed to disappear entirely, leaving only the sound of his own tires slicing through shallow puddles. Or perhaps it was the odd quiet, the kind that makes you expect something to happen just because everything feels too still. Daniel glanced at the clock on his dashboard and tried to convince himself he was overthinking. He told himself he just needed rest, that rain and darkness always made the mind play tricks. Still deep down, that old stubborn gut instinct whispered, somewhere ahead, something was waiting for him in the silence, a turn in routine, a surprise waiting beyond those familiar beams of light. Feeling the fatigue in his arms, and noticing his gas tank needle dipping dangerously close to empty, Daniel knew he had to stop soon or risk running out in the middle of nowhere. As he drove a little farther, relief washed over him when he spotted the bright neon lights of a gas station, just off the interstate, shining pale blue and white through the thick curtain of rain. He pulled in, the truck's headlights reflecting off slick pavement, and parked beneath the overhang near the pumps. The station looked mostly deserted, except for a lone pickup parked by the edge and the humming fluorescence overhead. He made his way inside the convenience store, shaking the rain from his jacket and breathing in the weird mix of coffee, cleaning supplies, and something fried from behind the counter. Usually he would have been all business, grab a coffee, maybe a sandwich, pay, and get back on the road with barely a word to anyone. But tonight, something felt different. The place was quieter than usual, and every sound seemed to echo. His eyes adjusted to the bright lights. Daniel noticed a woman standing by the window display. She looked older than anyone he had seen traveling alone this far out, her grey hair neatly pinned but wild at the edges. She wore layers of mismatched clothes, a faded floral scarf wrapped around her shoulders, and thick boots caked with old mud. The way she held herself, so still and almost expectant, made her look out of place and almost timeless, like she belonged to another age or maybe just slipped through a crack in it. It was her face that stopped Daniel in his tracks. There was something about her eyes, quiet and lost, and shining a little more than seemed normal in the harsh overhead light. He felt the strange urge to say something, but for a moment he just watched, quietly unsettled. The whole night had felt strange, but standing under the humming lights, looking at her, the strangeness sharpened. Her gaze met his, soft but somehow urgent, full of a wordless kind of hope or longing. Daniel felt his practiced walls, those habits built by years of keeping to himself on the road, start to slip. He realized in that moment He would have to make a choice. Walk away and shrug her off as someone else's problem, or do what his gut told him and pay attention to whatever odd request might be waiting in her silence. Daniel took a cautious step closer, mostly out of instinct and curiosity, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. Up close, the woman seemed even smaller than he'd guessed, her shoulders almost swallowed by the shawl she had wrapped tightly around herself. Her hands trembled as she clutched an old leather purse to her chest. Daniel saw her glance from him to the window, and then back, almost as if she wasn't sure whether she should speak at all. Finally, her voice came, thin and wavering, but holding a quiet determination that caught him off guard. "Excuse me," she started, her words a little hesitant. "Do you know if there's a bus that heads east tonight? I need to get back, but I can't quite remember the name. It's a place by the river with lilacs, my home, but the street name's just—" "Slip away from me." She looked away, embarrassment mingling with the deep tiredness in her features. The small details she offered sounded dreamy, as if she was trying to find a picture in her mind, but the pieces wouldn't quite fit. For a second, Daniel hesitated. The responsible driver in him, the part trained to watch the clock and keep moving, wanted to point her to the lonely bench outside and wish her luck, then get back on schedule, like always. But her frail hope hung in the air between them. He realized this wasn't just a case of a stranded traveler, it was something softer and somehow heavier. A person lost not just in place, but a little bit in time and memory too. It surprised him how quickly his thinking changed in her presence. The stories he'd heard from other truckers about getting drawn into strangers' troubles, losing time and adding stress, ran through his head, but they sounded hollow. The uncertainty in her request struck something inside him, shaking. Loose empathy he hadn't felt in a long time. The old habits of measuring worth in miles and tons fell away, replaced by the simple recognition that this evening wasn't just about deliveries anymore. Daniel suddenly felt the weight of the decision grow. The urgency of the job still buzzed at the back of his mind, the memories of dispatchers counting on him and the tight deadlines waiting down the road. But looking at the woman's gentle, pleading gaze, he felt something more important stirring, a reminder of the kind of kindness the world could use, and the bit of humanity he'd nearly forgotten along the way. Daniel found himself caught in a tug-of-war between his usual sense of duty to the job and the quiet plea he saw in the elderly woman's eyes. He quickly glanced down at his phone, where the details of his delivery schedule blinked at him. The next stop was in Syracuse, and he was already running a little behind. He pictured the response he'd probably get if he called in late. Dispatchers from Empire Freight had no patience for delays, and the company had a strict policy about sticking to routes and times. The thought of penalties and sharp emails made his jaw tighten a bit. Every trucker knew the drill. Being late meant possible of fines and lectures, or sometimes even missing out on future jobs. Daniel also knew there weren't many second chances in this line of work. Still, as the seconds stretched out, the steady presence of the old woman, her shaky hands and uncertain smile, reminded him that not every decision in life could be boiled down to dollars or miles. What if she were his own mother? What if nobody else ever bothered to stop for her? His internal argument went on for another long moment, echoing with all the old warnings about not getting involved. But deep down, something within him just refused to leave her stranded on that rainy, lonely stretch of highway. He took a slow breath, grounded himself in the truth that sometimes you only get one shot to do the right thing, and let compassion nudge him over the edge. Daniel stepped forward, offering the woman a gentle smile that was a little awkward, but sincere. "Hey, why don't you come with me? I'm heading east anyway. I can drive you a while, and maybe we'll figure out where you need to go along the way." For a second, she seemed surprised, as if she wasn't sure whether she'd heard him correctly. Then her face softened, and she nodded gratefully. Daniel took her light duffel bag, noticing how little it weighed, and guided her through the automatic doors into the downpour. They hustled through the rain toward his truck, the two of them suddenly bound by a simple promise and something like hope. Climbing into the warm cabin, Daniel realized the evening had changed. No longer just about cargo and deadlines, this trip became a shared journey, unknown, a bit risky, but filled with the chance for two very different people to find something they might have been missing. Sitting side by side in the soft glow of the dashboard lights, Daniel glanced at the older woman as she settled herself in the passenger seat, arranging her scarf neatly around her neck. The patter of rain faded and the wipers slowed, letting a hush fill the cab as he merged back onto the slick highway. Daniel figured that a little conversation might help her relax and give him a better idea of where she belonged. "So, what's your name?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone easy. She hesitated, blinking slowly, as if sifting through her mind for the answer. "People call me Sister Agnes," she finally replied, her words careful. "At least they used to, long ago." She stared quietly through the rain-dotted window, lips moving as if reciting an old prayer. Encouraged, Daniel tried gently to guide her memory. "Do you remember where you were going tonight? Any family nearby?" Sister Agnes shook her head, fragile and apologetic. He could sense the frustration just under her surface, like she was chasing memories that danced just out of reach. But then, in soft fits and starts, she began to recall little moments: a backyard filled with wild iris and peonies, a small worn statue of St. Francis near the porch, and the peaceful ringing of church bells at dawn. Those small flashes of memory painted a simple, quiet life, and Daniel listened intently, piecing together what he could. The mention of church bells and a statue made him think of a convent, or maybe a countryside monastery. "Did you live at a convent by any chance? Maybe over near Utica or Rome?" he asked, remembering that there were a few old convents tucked into the hills outside Albany. Sister Agnes's eyes sparked a little at the word convent. She nodded, then whispered, "Yes, I think so. There were sisters, gardens, prayer. I was safe there." Daniel realized then that this wasn't just about finding a street or a town. It was about helping her find her way back to the only life she truly remembered. The whole idea made his chest tighten, knowing how overwhelming the world could be when your memories slipped away. He took a breath, told himself he'd do his best, and drove on, heading north toward the most likely place, a quiet old convent he remembered passing years ago outside Schenectady. If hope was all Sister Agnes had left, then maybe giving her a real chance to get home was worth all the detours in the world. The night stretched long as the truck rolled past quiet neighborhoods and empty strip malls, the world outside dark, except for the occasional porch light or glowing road sign. As they drove, Sister Agnes loosened up, almost as if the moving truck and the comfort of a good listener made her worries lighter. She began to open up, sharing pieces of her life without much prompting from Daniel. Her voice was soft but sure when she spoke about her early days, the small town where she had first joined the order, the crowded dormitory rooms filled with laughter from young women learning how to care for each other and the world. She told stories about her work looking after children at the old St. Mary's home, orphans who arrived scared and left a little bit braver. Years melted away in her memories, and her words drew a picture of a youth spent making sacrifices for others, always choosing service over any personal dreams she might have had. Sister Agnes described the children she held close, teaching them how to spell their names and tie their shoes, and how she'd sit with them on stormy nights just to calm their fears. There was a real fondness in her stories, but each memory seemed to fade almost before it was fully told, like old film left out in the sun. Eventually, her stories grew sadder, blurring as she tried to recall the names of favorite children or fellow sisters she once called friends. "It all drifts away," she whispered one time, half to herself, "even their faces." She seemed more resigned than upset, her laments calm in their acceptance, as if she knew time had claimed much of what she once cherished. All the while, Daniel found himself growing both troubled and inspired. As someone who had built walls around his heart to get through lonely work and long weeks on the road, he realized he was letting this stranger in more than he meant to. The weight of her service and the quiet way she surrendered to her memory. Loss touched something inside him that he rarely noticed anymore. He saw their journey together not just as a strange detour, but as a kind of gift, a reminder that, outside the grind of making a living, there was room for kindness, for moments that mattered. For the first time in a long while, the world outside the cab seemed a little less harsh, and his own sense of purpose grew a bit wider. When Daniel finally stopped for fuel at a small roadside gas station just shy of the Mohawk Valley, he realized he needed help. The hours behind the wheel had given him small hints about Sister Agnes's past, but they weren't enough to point to any one place. As she dozed in the truck, exhausted from both the ride and the effort of pulling memories from the fog, Daniel grabbed his phone and searched for numbers. He decided to start with the obvious: convents and parishes in the area. It took patience and a lot of explaining. Some calls rang for what felt like forever before anyone picked up. He spoke with a tired-sounding receptionist at a parish near Albany. He reached a nurse at the local hospital's front desk who told him, not unkindly, that they had no record matching his description. Now and then, he'd get someone who listened just for a moment before cutting him off with a sigh. "Sorry, can't help you," or "You might try social services," or "She's not here." Each short conversation chipped away at his hope. Sister Agnes's story was important to him now, but to the people on the other end of the line, she was just one more stranger looking for a home nobody remembered. He leaned against the vending machine, phone to his ear, staring down the long stretch of night outside the window. Was he getting in over his head? Maybe he wouldn't find her home after all, and would have to settle for dropping her off at a shelter or with the police. The thought stung, and he fought it back. Finally, reaching for another slim chance, Daniel called St. Anne's Convent, a quiet place outside Schenectady. He only managed a brief description: grey hair, gentle manner, lost memories, before the nun on the other end interrupted him, voice hitching. "Oh, heavens," she said. "That sounds like Sister Agnes. She's been missing since yesterday, and we've had everyone out looking for her." The relief in her voice came through, loud and clear. Daniel felt the anxiety that had hung over him for miles start to lift. Suddenly, the struggle of the night took on new meaning. He got directions, promised to bring Sister Agnes straight there, and thanked the woman more times than he could count. With hope finally leading the way, he headed back to the truck, ready to finish the most important delivery of his life. The moment Daniel hung up the phone, he let out a long, shaky breath he didn't know he'd been holding, finding out that Sister Agnes really was missed by the sisters at St. Anne's Convent, lifted an enormous weight from his shoulders, but it also set a new challenge right in front of him. He checked the map again. St. Anne's wasn't exactly around the corner. With a few quick taps, he mapped out the fastest route, realizing there was still a good 60 miles to go, most of it down two-lane country roads. At the same time, the pressure of being so late with his run for Empire Freight pressed at the back of his mind. He knew he might be risking more than a scolding. There could be penalties or even a conversation with the boss in the morning. For a second, he considered calling in to explain, but then he thought about what really mattered tonight. He walked back to the truck and found Sister Agnes waking up, rubbing her eyes gently. Daniel sat behind the wheel, took a moment to steady himself, and passed along the news as simply as he could. They had found her home. He told her he'd spoken to the sisters, that they were waiting anxiously, and that she would be safe soon. At first, Sister Agnes just listened quietly. Then, like a light bulb flickering to life, her whole face shifted. Her eyes brightened, and her mouth trembled into a grateful smile. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice suddenly full of hope and warmth. "I didn't think anyone would find me. Thank you, Daniel." That thank you meant more to Daniel than any company bonus or on-time delivery slip. As he pulled out of the lot and set off towards St. Anne's, he barely noticed the new delay or the possibility of angry managers. He watched the joy on Sister Agnes's face, a happiness that made the truck's cabin glow with something almost like sunlight after a long night of rain and uncertainty. For the next stretch of road, the tension that had shadowed every mile finally melted away, their spirits lighter. They talked more easily, trading stories about childhood and long-ago family dinners, while the truck hummed along toward something good. Daniel felt like, for once, he was driving toward what truly mattered. As the miles slipped by under the steady hum of the tires, the world outside the windshield turned quieter. Soft music drifted from the radio, mellow tunes of classic folk songs that seemed just right for the grey blur of early morning. Sister Agnes, finally, able to leave her worry behind, leaned back in her seat and drifted off to sleep. Her gentle breathing filled the truck's cabin, in rhythm with the music, and even Daniel felt the edges of his own anxiety begin to unwind. In that calm, Daniel found himself less focused on the ticking clock and more on the small but powerful meaning behind their journey. Looking over at Sister Agnes, her hands folded peacefully in her lap, her face now free from the tension of before, he realized how rare it was to witness someone finally at ease. That brought a warm swell of pride that went beyond any professional accomplishment. He recognized in that moment the weight a simple act of kindness could carry. It was not about going out of his way for a stranger anymore. It was about doing something that mattered for its own sake, with his mind turning things over as the town lights faded into the distance behind them. Daniel started to think about others he might have overlooked along the way. The quiet, elderly man at his usual truck stop, the tired woman working a late shift at the diner, strangers whose struggles were often missed or dismissed. How many more people like Sister Agnes found themselves lost, invisible to the rest of the world, just trying to find a little help? He wondered how many of those lives took a different turn simply because someone decided to stop and care rather than keep moving. Every mile towards St. Anne's now felt like a vow to not let those he met fade into the background of his busy life. The road ahead did not seem as long or lonely anymore. It was filled with quiet purpose, each moment with Sister Agnes teaching him anew how easy it was to make a difference with just a little attention and empathy. He drove more slowly, savoring this lesson, feeling devoted not only to getting his passenger home, but to remembering her story long after this detour brought him back to his own. The first light of dawn was just beginning to show through a break in the clouds when Daniel caught sight of the old convent up ahead. He blinked hard, shaking off the drowsiness that came from driving all night, but he couldn't miss the tall stone walls brushing up against clusters of oak and maple trees. The air had that still, expectant chill that always comes at daybreak, and mist clung to the little patch of grass outside the entrance. As his truck rolled along the gravel driveway, Daniel could see the outline of a large iron gate, and just beyond it, the faint shape of a bell tower. The same bell Sister Agnes had described in her scattered memories. For a moment, Daniel slowed the truck to a crawl. That feeling of accomplishment crept in. He could feel it in his chest, not as a loud celebration, but as something quiet and strong. He looked over to Sister Agnes, who was waking up, her eyes blinking at the world outside as if she were stepping back into a familiar dream. No sooner had he stopped than a handful of sisters, all dressed in simple habits, hurried out through the front gate. Their faces were lined with both exhaustion and hope, some clapping their hands together, others just standing there with watering eyes. It was clear that these women had spent the last few days worried out of their minds, waiting for any news at all. The recognition was instant. One of the younger sisters called out, "Sister Agnes," as she ran forward, her voice shaking between tears and joy. In those next few moments, everything seemed to slow down. Daniel climbed out of the truck and helped Sister Agnes gently down from the cab. She stood for a second, taking in the sight around her. Then the sisters all but surrounded her, wrapping her in careful hugs and holding her hands as if making sure she was really there. There was no need for big speeches. A glance at the grateful faces, the tremble in their voices, and the tenderness in each gesture said everything. Daniel sensed the power of these silent thank yous, all the relief and gratitude bubbling over without a word having to be spoken. It was a small miracle, and even though it had come after a night of confusion and worry, everyone at the gate knew they were a part of something good and rare. As Sister Agnes stepped through the gate, the reunion turned into something Daniel would never forget. The sisters welcomed her with such obvious relief and love that it seemed as if everyone shared the same heart for a while. Some wept openly, the lines of sleepless worry slowly fading as they realized their lost friend and companion was finally home. Hugs and soft words passed between them, voices mixed with laughter and shaky sighs. Sister Agnes, still a little unsteady on her feet, managed to return every embrace. Despite her tiredness, she smiled in a way that made the whole group brighter, wrapping her arms around those nearest and whispering, thank you, I knew I would make it back." In the midst of it all, Daniel hung back, a little awkward among the crowd of sisters in their simple black and white habits, watching the gratitude ripple out around him. He never imagined his night would end like this, but the happiness in the air was more rewarding than he had thought possible. Someone tried pressing an envelope into Daniel's hand, insisting it was the least they could do. Another sister spoke, quietly about how Empire Freight should pay him for his time, and a third offered to make him breakfast before he left. But Daniel just shook his head and smiled. It really was nothing, he said honestly, feeling a warmth rise up from deep inside. Just do me a favor, will you? Next time you're all together for a service, keep me in your prayers. He shrugged, almost embarrassed. This is thanks enough. I'm lucky I was in the right place. The sisters nodded, and one or two reached out to touch his hand in understanding, promising softly that he would be remembered. Sister Agnes gave him one last, long look, filled with trust and peace, her words simple but meaningful. You brought me home. The heavy wooden doors closed behind the group as they led her inside, and the sound of the bell rang out faintly, welcoming her back to her sanctuary. Standing in the quiet morning, Daniel felt lighter, as though those gentle blessings had already reached him. He turned to leave, thinking that sometimes the smallest choices changed lives, and maybe this time even changed his own. Pulling out of the convent's driveway, Daniel let the engine idle for a moment before turning back onto the empty country road. The skies were getting lighter by the minute, but he knew that with each mile closer to Albany, he was heading straight into the storm he'd been expecting. There would be no hiding his delay or sidestepping hard questions from Empire Freight. He pictured the warehouse, the stacked pallets, harsh fluorescent lights, and the ever-present buzz of forklifts. Most of all, he imagined Tom, the warehouse supervisor, whose raised eyebrow had shut down many drivers' excuses before. But as he merged onto the highway, Daniel realized those worries felt strangely far away now, as if he'd left some burden behind at the convent gates. He drove with the windows cracked, letting in the early morning air, his mind quiet and settled. The weight of possible reprimands, late deliveries, shifts lost, maybe even a cut in pay, barely registered. There was a lightness in Daniel's chest that had nothing to do with getting rest and everything to do with what he had just done. It was the kind of feeling you carried around, not because your job was safe, but because you knew deep down you had made the choice that was right. This moment had changed something in him, setting a new bar for what really mattered. As the city skyline rose up, Daniel rolled into the freight yard, almost 2 hours past when he was supposed to. The place had long since shaken off its sleepy night, and folks were already busy. He parked his truck in his usual spot, pulling the paperwork tight in his hand. Tom waited by the dock, arms crossed and stone-faced. Without a word, Tom launched right into it. "You know we run on a schedule here, Daniel. People count on you. This messes up more than just your record." Daniel listened in silence, head high, and only when Tom's frustration had finished pouring out did he speak. "You're right. There was a delay, but I did what anyone should have done." There was no anger or regret in his voice, only certainty. Tom glared, taken aback by the calm response, and for a split second, Daniel saw a flicker of something like grudging respect before the conversation went on. Daniel stood steady, knowing he wouldn't have changed a thing. After the face-to-face with Tom at the warehouse, Daniel found himself back in the driver's seat, staring at his phone as it buzzed on the dashboard. This time, it was the district. Supervisor Jack calling. Daniel knew the conversation would not be easy. He picked up and listened as Jack jumped right in, his tone sharp and businesslike, wanting to know why the delivery was late and what reason Daniel had for breaking from the assigned route with company property. Instead of coming up with excuses, Daniel took a slow breath and told Jack everything exactly as it happened. He described the moment he met Sister Agnes, alone and scared by the roadside, how he'd chosen to make sure she was safe even if it messed up his schedule, how, mile by mile, it became clear that helping her had to come before worrying about his own record. The words spilled out in a steady voice, carrying all the honest worry and strange hope that the long night had brought to his heart. When Daniel finished, there was a heavy pause on the other end, the usual script. The scolding, maybe even a threat to his job, did not come right away. That silence dragged on, growing more uncomfortable with every passing second, until Jack finally cleared his throat. He told Daniel flatly that company policy was still company policy. Daniel would face a written warning and see a deduction in his pay for the missed delivery window. That was just the way things worked at Empire Freight, and Daniel understood. He blinked off the call, feeling lighter than he had any right to, almost surprised at the satisfaction that welled up inside him. The threat of losing a little money or a faint mark in his employment file seemed small compared to the reality of what he had done. He had made a choice with his heart first, and the world had not ended. In that simple, honest decision, Daniel recognized real clarity, not the kind that comes from following rules, but the kind that comes from standing by what you believe is right. As he put the truck into gear and headed back out, the road ahead looked different, gentler somehow. Maybe it was the sense that for a few hours he had touched something good that would last much longer than the length of any route or the weight of any reprimand. Early the next morning, Daniel sat in a small diner just outside Utica, drinking hot coffee and staring out the window at the morning traffic. The soft chatter of a few regulars mixed with the clinking of cups and silverware. The world seemed a little slower now, as if the rush of yesterday had been replaced by something kinder. He was about halfway through his second mug when his phone vibrated on the tabletop, the screen showing a number he did not recognize. He picked it up, expecting maybe Tom or someone from Empire Freight, ready for another round about company rules. But instead, he heard a gentle, warm voice introduce herself as Mother Catherine, the superior at St. Anne's Convent. She got straight to the point. She wanted to speak with him directly. The surprise left Daniel quiet for a second, but as Mother Catherine explained, emotion started to creep into his words. She told him that Sister Agnes had woken up that morning different, clear-headed, remembering names and stories that had faded in recent months. There was a kind of hope in Mother Catherine's voice that made Daniel feel like he was a part of something remarkable. Agnes herself had insisted he be thanked, and as Mother Catherine relayed snippets of what Agnes said, Daniel felt his throat tighten. Agnes had recalled moments from her early days at St. Anne's, laughter in the gardens, and the song the bell made on the first Sunday of each month. These little details, lost for years, had returned after her journey home, and the other sisters had even called it a gift to have her mind so present again. While he listened, Daniel felt an unexpected wave of emotion rush over him, blurring the edges of the diner around him. He held the phone close, silently wishing he could say something worthy, but simple gratitude was all he could muster. The road, all the mistakes and the long hours, suddenly seemed lighter. No one in the diner would have guessed the tough-looking trucker at the window had tears in his eyes, but Daniel didn't try to brush them away. For all the years he'd spent worried only about making good time and not getting docked pay, here was something honest and good, directly tied to a choice he made. The memory of that midnight detour and the sound of Agnes's voice would stay with him for a long, long time. As the call with Mother Catherine came to an end, Daniel sat quietly, for a moment, letting the last words settle in his mind. She had thanked him, sure, but what stuck with him was how she talked about hope, about how a small act from a stranger could change the atmosphere of a whole place. He said his goodbyes and put the phone down, but something inside him felt different. It was not the type of reward you could fit on a pay stub or deposit into a bank account. Instead, it was a feeling warming him from the inside out, something like being seen and appreciated for who he was, not just what he did for a living. He paid his tab and stepped back out into the parking lot, taking in the sharp scent of morning. His rig was waiting, gleaming under the early rays of the sun, ready for another long stretch of highway. Climbing up into the cab, Daniel realized there was a comfort in the solitude there that he had never noticed before. Instead of feeling isolated or worn out by endless miles, he now carried a sense of purpose with him. It was not about making up for lost hours or fretting over what the next call from the office would bring. Everything felt simpler, more clear. As he pulled out of the diner and merged onto the interstate, he looked at the sky, streaked with the promise of a new day. Daniel understood in that quiet moment that some loads were never a burden. The things that truly matter, the times when you put someone else first or offer a little kindness to a person in need, do not weigh you down. In fact, they do the opposite. They give you a secret strength, something steady to lean on whenever the world feels too big or too indifferent. All at once, the truck's familiar noises seemed almost like music, and the scenery rolling by looked a little brighter. Daniel gripped the wheel with steady hands, guided now by something more important than any schedule or paycheck. For the first time in a long while, he was not just moving freight. He was carrying along a story that would travel with him wherever he went, a story about choices, second chances, and the blessings that come when you let your heart set your course. The days slipped by as Daniel settled back into his regular routine, moving goods up and down the highways, stretching across New York and out toward Pennsylvania. Every trip still had its share of early morning starts, hours rolling past, barely marked by the changing shapes of trucks and cars outside his window. The hum of the tires on old pavement and the click of the turn signal became part of the rhythm again, just as they always had. But Daniel felt, deep down, that something inside him had shifted, for good. There was a gentle sort of restlessness that came with this change, not the kind that made you uneasy, but a sweeter, hopeful kind that kept him alert to the world outside his windshield. Even as the miles wore on, Daniel noticed himself looking at things a little differently. Whenever a small church steeple peeked above the treetops, or a cluster of stained glass windows caught the sunlight on the edge of a tiny town, he found himself easing off the gas. He would offer up a quiet thought, sending a simple prayer out into the world, not just for Sister Agnes, whose memory still warmed his heart, but for anyone who might be wandering or lost along these same roads. For truckers, time is money and every minute adds up, but Daniel began to find meaning in these small pauses, as if he was finally tapping into something he had missed for years. Sometimes he would remember the night he had crossed paths with Sister Agnes. He would picture the look in her eyes as the convent doors opened, or imagine the gentle gratitude in Mother Catherine's voice. Those memories settled in him like a soft light, reminding him that the world was full of surprise meetings and second chances. He also realized that the countless faces he saw at rest stops, gas stations, or hidden diners might all carry their own quiet stories, their own burdens he would never know about unless he paid attention. As the weeks went by, Daniel's usual indifference to the people and places along his routes gave way to a new awareness. Even a brief smile at a toll booth or a short chat with another driver became little reminders of the unexpected moments that could break down old walls. In this way, he moved forward, always driving, always hoping, always ready for the next turn in the road that might change everything. It was on a Thursday afternoon, with rain tapping lightly against the windshield, when Daniel's phone rang, with the familiar Empire Freight number showing up. He almost let it roll to voicemail, figuring it was just a call about paperwork or another scheduling change. Instead, curiosity got the better of him, and he answered on the third ring. "Satudu." His surprise, it was not just Tom. It was Tom along with someone from the company's main office, a woman named Lisa he'd never spoken to before. The tone was different right away, less business, more genuine care, and Daniel braced himself for news he was not sure he wanted to hear. Lisa told him that a letter had arrived from St. Anne's Convent, handwritten and signed by Mother Catherine. She explained that the letter described in detail the night Daniel brought Sister Agnes home, the uncertainty, the compassion, and the change that followed. It painted a picture of how one truck driver's decision had sparked hope, not only in the convent, but among people who cared for Agnes. The letter had made the rounds, starting with the supervisor's desk and going all the way up the company chain. According to Lisa, the effect was immediate. No one expected such a story to come from a routine delivery route. As Daniel sat there in his cab listening, he felt a strange mix of embarrassment and pride. He was always happiest flying, a little under the radar, but now, thanks to the letter, everyone at Empire Freight seemed to know his name. Next, Lisa let him know that the company had decided to drop all the warnings and penalties from his record, completely. But it did not stop there. The management wanted to do more. They offered Daniel a fixed route, something every driver hoped for, with better hours and a reduction in heavy night runs. It came with a pay bump and a promise that his experience would be used as an example for the team. The news caught Daniel off guard. For years he had put in the miles, kept to himself, and never asked for anything special. Now, for the first time, his choices, not just his hard work, were being noticed. As he hung up, the damp New York sky seemed brighter, and Daniel could not help but smile, humbled and grateful for the twist of fate that had come his way. Daniel could hardly believe how fast everything had changed. Only a few weeks ago he was just another trucker, keeping his head down and doing the job, nothing more or less. Now this, an unexpected promotion handed to him not because he asked or schemed for it, but simply because of that small, honest moment when he had stopped to help someone in need. The feeling was almost too much to handle. He found himself laughing out loud in the cab of his truck and then blinking away a tear, the sort of emotion that sneaks up when life gives you something you never thought you would see. He tried to share the good news with his sister, over the phone, but even as he told her about the fixed route and the better hours, Daniel found that the real gift was harder to explain. Yes, the new conditions would make life easier. No more endless nights, more time at home. Maybe even the chance to join family for Sunday dinners every so often. But it was more than that. For the first time, he felt like who he was. The choices he made when nobody was watching actually mattered to people who barely knew him. His sister sensed it too, and just listened, understanding he needed space to work it all out on his own. The next morning, Daniel pulled onto the interstate with a new sense of purpose. The long line of 18-wheelers, all heading out on their own journeys, now looked different, almost friendlier. He noticed the sun rising through a break in the clouds and couldn't help but smile at the simple beauty of it. The road, which always used to feel like a drain on his time and energy, now seemed fresh, like the beginning of a new story. He had been given a second chance to enjoy this life, and just maybe to make a difference again, even if it was only in small ways. Daniel realized then that not every kind act fades into the background. Sometimes what you do ripples out unexpectedly and comes back to you 100-fold, crossing boundaries and connecting people who would never meet otherwise. As the engine rumbled and the miles slipped away, he held on to that thought, grateful that the best parts of us, given quietly, have a way of finding their place in the world. A few weeks after the letter and the new routine had settled into his life, Daniel started feeling something tugging at him. He kept thinking about Sister Agnes and the peaceful grounds of St. Anne's Convent. There was a part of him that longed to see how she was doing and to let her know, in person, how much their brief journey had changed him. So, on a clear Saturday morning, Daniel pointed his truck north and made the drive out past Binghamton, through rolling hills and quiet neighborhoods, until he reached those old stone gates, just like he remembered. He parked his rig off to the side where it would not draw too much attention and walked up the path towards the entrance. As he approached, one of the sisters working in the garden recognized him right away and waved him over with a big smile. "Daniel, you're back," she said, voice full of warmth. Before he knew it, Daniel was invited inside, ushered down. The familiar hallway with portraits of saints on the walls and the gentle hum of distant singing drifting from the chapel. He could feel his nerves buzzing, but somehow the convent's calm made it easier to breathe. They found Sister Agnes in the garden, surrounded by rows of blooming daisies and sunflowers. Even though she was sitting quietly, there was a sense of peace around her, as if the flowers themselves were keeping her company. When Agnes looked up and saw Daniel, her whole face brightened. She may have looked frailer than before, a little smaller in her chair, but the light in her eyes was as strong as ever. Their conversation was gentle and easy, with Sister Agnes sharing stories from her youth, and Daniel talking about the road, his family, and the changes the past month had brought. There was no need for big explanations or fancy words. Just sitting together in the afternoon sun was enough. As the visit drew to a close, Sister Agnes reached into her pocket and pressed a small silver St. Christopher medallion into Daniel's hand. It was not expensive, but he understood the meaning at once. With that simple gesture, it felt like their journey had been sealed, and Daniel left the convent grounds with a full heart, sure that some meetings last long beyond the road itself. Ever since that afternoon, Daniel kept the little St. Christopher medallion hanging from his truck's rearview mirror. It swung gently with every turn, catching the sunlight or sometimes flashing in the headlights of cars passing by at night. He looked at it each morning as he started the engine, feeling comforted by the memory it carried. For Daniel, it had become more than a keepsake. It was a quiet reminder about how much it mattered to stay open and soft-hearted, even on days when the job pulled him in a dozen different directions. He noticed that the medallion's presence changed the way he approached his routine. Each day on the road, even with deadlines and paperwork and the constant push to keep moving, Daniel paid more attention to the people he met along his routes. Whenever he checked his mirrors or waited in line at a rest stop, he found himself thinking about Agnes and all the small chances to show kindness that might be waiting around the corner. He realized that the hustle of everyday work made it easy to miss out on these moments. But now, the reminder was always there, literally dangling in front of his eyes. Often during the long hauls through the early morning hours, Daniel wondered who else he might meet. Were there more people out there like Agnes, just waiting for someone to notice or lend a hand when it mattered? Sometimes he would pull over, just for a moment, to look up at the stars, or listen to the quiet and let his mind wander. He could not predict who he would cross paths with next, but he knew that if another moment came, a chance to help, to listen, to do something decent, he hoped he would have the courage to pull over again. In those moments of reflection, Daniel came to understand something that went far beyond trucks and schedules. Not all loads show up on a bill of lading, and some of the most important things people carry are invisible and weightless, and yet so powerful that they affect the whole direction of a life. The medallion was a symbol for all of that. The value in every meeting, the risks worth taking, and the honest truth that sometimes the best parts of any journey are the ones you never planned for, but chose anyway.